Captain Hyun-woo pressed his face against the cold metal window of his cargo ship and watched the stars drift by like tiny diamonds scattered across black cloth. His ship, the Steady Hand, carried medical supplies to the outer colonies where alien children waited for medicine that would save their lives. He had been making this same journey for 12 years now, and he never got tired of knowing that his work mattered. Down in the engine room, mechanic Yunji wiped sweat from her forehead as she worked on the hyperdrive for the 16th hour straight. 3 different alien species had looked at this broken engine and declared it completely dead beyond any hope of repair. But Junji knew better. She knew that machines were like people. They just needed someone to listen to them and understand what they were trying to say. The engine hummed back to life under her skilled hands, and she smiled. The Zentari engineers had said it would take 6 months to build a new one, the Corvan. Mechanics had wanted to scrap the whole ship. The crystalline Nexari had simply walked away, claiming the task was impossible. But humans never walked away from a problem. They just kept working until they found a solution. In the medical bay, Dr. So Young checked her latest batch of vaccines. She had spent 3 years developing a cure for the Cathri plague that had killed thousands of the cat-like aliens. Their own doctors had given up hope, but So Young and her team worked day and night until they found the answer. Now Cathri children could play safely in their crystal gardens without fear of the disease that had haunted their species for generations. The cargo hold was full of supplies heading to 12 different worlds: food for the hungry, medicine for the sick, tools for builders who were constructing new homes on distant planets. Every crate had been loaded by human hands, every manifest checked by human eyes, every delivery route planned by human minds. The aliens who would receive these supplies probably never thought about who had made it all possible. The bridge communication officer Minho received a message from Station 7. The Vorthen Trade Authority was complaining about delayed shipments again. They wanted to know why their luxury goods were taking so long to arrive while medical supplies seemed to move through space much faster. Minho just smiled and sent back a polite message explaining that emergency cargo always took priority. The truth was that humans had learned to quietly manage the galaxy in ways that most aliens never noticed. When a Zentari merchant demanded faster delivery for his expensive artwork, the human captains would make sure that food shipments to starving colonies went first. When Corvan military leaders wanted their weapons moved quickly, the human logistics teams would ensure that medicine reached plague victims before bullets reached soldiers. Ambassador Taemin sat in the human section of the council chambers, a small area tucked away in the corner where the galaxy kept its most useful servants. He listened as the great alien leaders debated and argued about trade agreements and military campaigns and resource allocation. Everyone had opinions about how the galaxy should be run, but nobody seemed interested in who would actually do the work. The Zentari delegate stood up and demanded better access to rare minerals for his people's mining operations. He waved his forearms dramatically and spoke of ancient rights and historical claims. The other species nodded or argued depending on their own interests, but everyone knew that human miners would be the ones crawling through dangerous tunnels to extract whatever materials the council decided to allocate. A Corvan general with scarred armor and missing tentacles spoke passionately about border disputes with the Nexari Empire. He needed more weapons, more ships, more soldiers to defend his people's territory from crystal-based invaders. The debate went on for hours, but everyone understood that human engineers would build the weapons, human pilots would fly the ships, and human soldiers would probably die fighting in a war that had nothing to do with Earth. The Nexari representative, a shimmering being made of living crystal, chimed in with concerns about resource allocation. Their people needed specific minerals to grow their city structures, and they were falling behind in the galactic economy because other species were hoarding the materials they required. The solution, as always, would involve human cargo ships, human miners, and human diplomats working to make everyone happy through it all. Taemin took notes and nodded politely. He had been doing this job for 23 years, and he knew that his role was not to make decisions, but to make sure that whatever the council decided would actually happen. When the session ended, he would send messages to human workers across the galaxy telling them about new assignments, new destinations, new problems to solve. The pattern was everywhere humans looked in the galaxy. They were the ones who kept the lights on in alien cities. They were the ones who grew food in the agricultural stations, orbiting distant stars they were. The ones who taught alien children how to read and write and dream of futures that their parents thought impossible. They were the ones who died in wars that other species started. On the farming station above, Kepler 442b human agriculturalist Su Min tended to crops that would feed 3 different alien species. His workers had developed new growing techniques that increased food production by 40%, but the aliens who ate the food never knew his name. The Corvan military got their emergency rations, the Zentari colonies received their exotic fruits, and the Nexari settlements obtained the mineral-rich vegetables that helped their crystal. Bodai's grow teacher Jinnah worked in the education center on Luna Station, where she helped young aliens learn about mathematics and science and history. Her students came from 7 different species, and she had learned to adapt her lessons for minds that worked in completely different ways. Some of her students would grow up to become leaders of their peoples, but they would probably never remember the human woman who taught them to think clearly and solve problems creatively. Security Chief Wu Jin patrolled the corridors of Trade Station Alpha, where representatives from dozens of species came to buy and sell goods from across the galaxy. His human security team kept the peace between aliens who had been enemies for centuries. They settled disputes, prevented fights, and made sure that trade could continue flowing smoothly. Most of the aliens barely noticed the humans who made their business possible. Council saw humans as reliable and useful, and best of all, they did not cause problems. They did not demand seats on the High Council like the ambitious Zentari. They did not threaten to leave the Alliance when things got difficult like the proud Corvan. They did not go to war with their neighbors like the territorial Nexari. They just worked quietly and efficiently like organic machines that happened to eat food and need sleep. What the Council failed to understand was that humans were not machines at all. They were people with feelings and dreams and hopes for the future. They had families. They loved children they wanted to protect in worlds they called home. They had served the galaxy faithfully for 300 years because they believed they were building something important, something that would make life better for everyone, but they were also people with limits, and those limits were being tested every single day. Every time an alien leader made a decision that would cost human lives, every time the Council ignored human needs to focus on alien politics, every time someone died because paperwork was more important than people, something small and vital cracked inside the human spirit. In the depths of space, Captain Hyun Woo continued his journey toward the outer colonies, carrying medicine that would save lives. Dr. So Young worked on cures for diseases that affected species she had never met. Engineer Yunji repaired machines that kept alien civilizations running. Teacher Jitna shaped young minds that would inherit the galaxy. They did it all because they believed it mattered, because they thought their service was appreciated, because they hoped that someday the galaxy would become a place where everyone could live in peace and prosperity. But belief and hope and service all have their limits, and the humans were about to discover what happened when those limits were finally reached. The alarm came at 3 in the morning ship time. Captain Hyun Woo rolled out of his bunk and stumbled to the bridge where Communication Officer Minho was already receiving the distress signal. The voice coming through the speakers was filled with panic and desperation. Colony ship New Hope was dying in space near the Vorthan system. 10,000 human settlers, including 3,000 children, were trapped in a metal coffin that was slowly running out of air. The main reactor had failed. The backup systems were failing one by one, and they had maybe 6 hours before everyone aboard would suffocate in the darkness. Hyun Woo did not hesitate. He ordered his crew to change course immediately. The luxury goods in his cargo hold could wait. While 10,000 people fought for their lives, every second counted, and the Steady Hand was the closest ship that could help. The New Hope had been carrying families to establish a new colony on the edge of human space. Farmers and teachers and engineers who wanted to build something beautiful on a distant world. Engineer Yunji was already in the engine room, pushing the hyperdrive beyond its normal limits. She knew the ship better than anyone knew every bolt and wire and circuit that kept them moving through space. If she could give them just a little more speed, they might reach the dying colony ship in time to save some of the people aboard. But when they arrived at the edge of Vorthan space, the Trade Authority ships were waiting. The sleek alien vessels formed a barrier between the human rescue ships and the New Hope. Captain Hyanwu tried to explain the situation to the Vorthan commander, but the alien was more interested in paperwork than people. The Vorthan commander spoke in a cold mechanical voice about sovereignty and proper procedures. He explained that no ships could enter their space without proper permits, and the humans had not filed the correct forms. The fact that 10,000 people were dying did not matter as much as following the rules. Minho sent emergency messages to the council begging for help. Ambassador Taemin rushed to call an emergency session, but the great alien leaders were not interested in moving quickly. The Zentari representative yawned and checked his personal messages. The Corvan delegate asked why humans always seem to have these problems. The Nexari ambassador suggested that maybe humans should buy better ships if they wanted to avoid such disasters. Dr. So Young was on one of the other rescue ships that had answered the distress call. She listened to the radio chatter as families aboard the New Hope said goodbye to each other. Parents were recording final messages for relatives back on Earth. Children were asking why the air was getting hard to breathe. Old people were telling stories about the homes they would never see again. The council voted to respect Vorthan sovereignty. They could not interfere with another species' internal affairs, even if it meant letting 10,000 humans die. The paperwork had not been filed properly, and rules were rules. The galaxy had operated on these principles for centuries, and they would not change them now just because some humans were in trouble. Captain Henwu tried to run the blockade anyway. He could not stand by and watch while people died for no reason other than bureaucratic stupidity. But the Vorthan ships opened fire not to destroy the human vessels, but to disable them. The message was clear: follow the rules or face the consequences. Engineer Yunji watched the scanner display as the New Hope grew smaller and smaller in the distance. She could see the life signs getting weaker as the oxygen ran out and the temperature dropped. The people aboard were freezing and suffocating while alien bureaucrats debated the proper way to file emergency permits. The colony ship went silent at 11:47. In the morning, 10,000 human lives ended because filing the proper forms was more important than saving people. The rescue ships arrived 6 hours later when the paperwork was finally approved, but by then there was nothing left to rescue except frozen bodies floating in a metal tomb. Dr. So Young led the medical team that examined the dead. She had seen death before, had lost patients despite her best efforts to save them, but this was different. This was not disease or accident or the natural end of life. This was murder by bureaucracy. 10,000 people killed by the same system that humans had served faithfully for 3 centuries. The bodies of the children were the hardest to look at. Little faces that would never grow up, dreams that would never be fulfilled, families that would never be reunited. The youngest victim was only 6 months old, a baby who had died in her mother's arms while alien officials debated the proper procedures for emergency rescues. Back on the rescue ships, the human crews stood in stunned silence. They had always believed that their service mattered, that they were part of something greater than themselves. But now they had to face the truth that their lives meant nothing to the aliens they served. The galaxy they had helped build saw them as disposable tools, not as people with families and dreams and the right to live. The council issued a formal statement expressing regret for the unfortunate incident. They promised to review emergency protocols to prevent similar tragedies in the future. They established a committee to study the situation and make recommendations for improved procedures. Then they moved on to debating tax rates on imported luxury goods. In the human quarters of stations across the galaxy, people gathered to watch the news broadcasts about the New Hope disaster. They saw the frozen bodies being loaded into cargo holds. They heard the recorded final messages from parents to their children. They learned that their own government had voted to let them die rather than upset alien bureaucrats. Something fundamental changed that day in the way humans looked at their place in the galaxy. For 3 centuries they had served without question, believing that their work was appreciated and that their sacrifices mattered, but the New Hope showed them the truth about how much their lives were worth to the aliens they served. Engineer Yunji went back to her work, but her hands moved differently now. She still fixed the broken machines, but she no longer worked with the same eager enthusiasm. She began to wonder why she was helping people who would let her die for the sake of Paperwork Captain Hanwoo continued his delivery runs, but he started asking questions he had never asked before. Why did humans always do the dangerous jobs? Why did they take orders from aliens who saw them as expendable? Why did they build a civilization for people who did not care if they lived or died? They are so young. Returned to her research, but she could not stop thinking about the children who had died in the new hope. She had spent years developing cures for alien diseases, but who was working to protect human lives? Who was making sure that human children could grow up safely in a galaxy that seemed designed to destroy them? The questions spread from ship to ship, from station to station, from colony to colony. Humans who had never questioned their role in the galaxy began to wonder if they were building something for their own benefit, or just making life easier for aliens who would never return the favor. The breaking point had been reached, and nothing would ever be the same again. The faithful servants were starting to remember that they were people, not machines, and people could choose to stop serving masters who did not value their lives. The quiet revolution, the change started in the places where humans worked hardest and were noticed least. Engineer Yoonji stared at the broken hyperdrive in front of her, the same type of system she had repaired hundreds of times before. She could fix it in 2 hours like she always did, but instead she opened her technical manual and began following every single step exactly as written. The manual said to run a complete diagnostic check on all 17 subsystems before beginning repairs. So she did, even though she could see the problem with her eyes. The manual said to verify parts compatibility with 3 different databases. So she did, even though she had memorized the specifications years ago. The manual said to test each component individually before installation. So she did, even though she knew they were all working fine. What used to take 2 hours now took 8. The Zentari ship captain who owned the hyperdrive was furious about the delay, but Eunji just smiled and pointed to the manual. She was following proper procedures, just like the aliens always demanded. Everything was being done exactly by the book, no shortcuts, no creative solutions, just careful, methodical work. Down in the medical research facility, Dr. So Young implemented new safety protocols for her laboratory. Every experiment now required additional review periods. Every test result needed verification from multiple sources. Every research report had to be approved by committees of scientists from different species who knew nothing about the work being done. When the Corvan Empire requested help with a livestock disease affecting their food production, Dr. So Young explained that proper scientific methodology could not be rushed. The research would be thorough and accurate, but it would take time to ensure that every possible variable was considered. The cows would have to wait while humans followed the same careful procedures that aliens demanded for their own projects. Captain Hyun-woo discovered that his ship's navigation computer had developed interesting quirks. It would identify asteroid fields that required careful navigation around completely empty space. It would plot courses that added days to delivery schedules while claiming to optimize fuel efficiency. It would demand maintenance checks at the most inconvenient times. The luxury goods still arrived at their destinations, but not when the alien customers expected them. Hyun-woo would apologize politely and explain that safety regulations required him to follow all recommended procedures. Computer glitches were unpredictable and proper maintenance could not be rushed. Communication Officer Minho began following communication protocols with exact precision. Every message had to be logged in triplicate. Every transmission required security verification. Every report needed to be formatted according to official standards. The process that used to take minutes now took hours, but everything was completely by the book. The beautiful thing about the human approach was that they never broke any rules. They never refused direct orders. They never did anything that could be criticized by alien supervisors. They simply began working exactly as their contracts specified. No more and no less. Extra effort that had made human workers so valuable just disappeared. The overtime hours that kept alien systems running smoothly were replaced by strict adherence to work schedules. The creative problem solving that had saved alien lives and money was replaced by careful step-by-step procedures that guaranteed results but took much longer to achieve. Ambassador Taemin played his part perfectly in the council chambers. He continued to nod and take notes during the endless debates about trade agreements and military campaigns, but his reports back to human colonies began to change. Instead of immediately prioritizing alien requests, he started focusing on human needs, first when the Zentari complained about delayed shipments. Taemin suggested they might want to hire their own transport companies. When the Corvan military demanded faster weapons delivery, he reminded them that quality control could not be rushed. When the Nexari wanted immediate research results, he politely explained that scientific accuracy required time. The ripple effects started small but spread quickly. A Corvan military base ran out of food because their supply ship was delayed by necessary safety inspections that had never been required before. A Zentari luxury liner lost power in deep space because the human-maintained relay stations were undergoing routine maintenance that happened to coincide with the ship's passage. A Nexari colony found their water purification system failing. Because the human technicians were attending mandatory training sessions that could not be postponed, the system could be repaired, but only after the humans completed their required education on the latest safety protocols. Across the galaxy, alien leaders began to notice that things were not working as smoothly as they used to. Projects that should have taken weeks were taking months. Simple repairs required teams of specialists who needed to consult multiple manuals and run extensive tests before making any changes. The Vorthan Trade Authority was particularly affected when their main cargo processing facility experienced a complete system failure. Human supervisor Jiho arrived with his team and spent 3 days examining the problem. They ran every diagnostic test recommended by the technical specifications. They consulted repair manuals from the original manufacturers. They contacted specialists from 12 different companies to verify their findings. Finally, Jiho delivered his report. The system required a complete overhaul that would take at least 6 months. The Vorthans were furious, but they had no choice. Without the processing facility, their entire trade network would collapse. They had to accept the human assessment and wait for the repairs to be completed. What the Vorthans did not know was that Jiho could have fixed the problem in about 4 hours. It was a simple cascade failure in the primary data routing system, the kind of issue he had resolved dozens of times before, but this time he followed every procedure in the manual exactly as written, with no shortcuts or creative solutions. Similar scenes played out on thousands of worlds and stations. Alien leaders who had never paid attention to human workers suddenly found themselves dealing with delays, explanations, and procedures that seemed to serve no purpose except to slow everything down. The humans were not sabotaging anything. They were not breaking rules or refusing orders. They were simply working exactly as carefully and methodically as their contracts required. The galaxy that had demanded proper procedures was finally getting them. But the aliens had never realized how much they depended on human workers. Going above and beyond their official duties for centuries, humans had worked extra hours, solved problems creatively, and found ways to make impossible things happen. Now they were doing exactly what they were paid to do and nothing more. The change was subtle but devastating. The galaxy had been built on the assumption that humans would always find a way to make things work. When humans stopped trying to exceed expectations, the entire system began to slow down like a machine running out of oil. Still, most alien leaders did not understand what was happening. They assumed the delays and problems were just normal inefficiencies that would resolve themselves over time. They had never bothered to learn how much work humans actually did, so they could not recognize when that work started to follow the rules instead of exceeding them. But across human space, something important was happening for the first time in 3 centuries. Humans were working for themselves instead of for the galaxy that had taken them for granted. They were remembering what it felt like to have dignity and self-respect. They were learning that they did not have to be grateful for the chance to serve people who saw them as disposable tools. The quiet revolution had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first major system failure happened on a Tuesday morning when the Vorthan Trade Authority Central Processing Complex went completely dark. The facility handled cargo manifests for half the galaxy, tracking billions of shipments between thousands of worlds. When the computers stopped working, the entire galactic trade network began to collapse. Alien technicians rushed to diagnose the problem, but the system was too complex for them to understand. The Vorthans had built their economy on human design networks maintained by human engineers, and when those systems failed, they discovered they had no idea how to fix them. The emergency call went out to the human maintenance crew, and Supervisor Jiho arrived with his team within 6 hours. They spent the first day just examining the facility, walking through corridors full of humming computers and blinking lights that meant nothing to the panicked Vorthan administrators. Jiho opened his technical manual and began reading the diagnostic procedures step by step. His team ran every test listed in the official documentation. They checked power systems, cooling systems, network connections, and data storage arrays. They consulted with specialists on other worlds and waited for responses to their carefully worded technical questions. On the second day, they began running the complete system analysis required by protocol. The manual specified that every component needed to be tested individually before any repairs could be attempted. So they tested thousands of components one by one, documenting the results in detailed reports that would be reviewed by multiple supervisors. The Vorthan Trade Minister watched the humans work with growing frustration. He had expected them to identify the problem quickly and fix it within hours like they always did. Instead, they seemed to be following some elaborate ritual that accomplished nothing while his entire economy ground to a halt. The third day, Jiho finally delivered his preliminary assessment. The system had suffered a cascade failure that affected multiple interconnected subsystems. A complete overhaul would be required, including replacement of major components, testing of all backup systems, and recalibration of the entire network. The estimated time for completion was 6 months. The trade minister exploded in anger, demanding to know why such a simple repair would take so long. Jiho calmly explained that the manual specified extensive testing protocols to ensure system reliability. Shortcuts had been tried in the past, and they had led to even worse failures. The only way to guarantee success was to follow every procedure exactly as written. What the Vorthans did not know was that Jiho had identified the real problem within the first hour. A simple software conflict had caused the cascade failure, and he could have fixed it before lunch, but the manual required extensive analysis of all possible causes and comprehensive testing of every component. Before any changes could be made, similar disasters began happening across the galaxy. The Zentari Mining Consortium lost 3 asteroid processing stations when their automated systems malfunctioned. Human engineers arrived to help but explained that repairs would take months because safety protocols required complete rebuilding of the control systems. The Corvan military found their newest battleship stranded in space when its weapon systems failed during a training exercise. Human technicians came aboard and spent weeks running diagnostics on every component. They discovered that the targeting computer needed to be completely replaced, a process that would take 4 months, because each weapon system had to be individually tested and calibrated. Dr. So-Young Medical Research Facility became a model of scientific thoroughness. When the Nexari requested urgent help with a bacterial infection affecting their crystal gardens, she launched a comprehensive research program that would examine every possible aspect of the problem. The study would include environmental impact assessments, genetic analysis of the bacteria, testing of 17 different treatment approaches, and peer review by scientists from multiple species. Dr. So-Young estimated that the complete research would take approximately 3 years, but the results would be absolutely reliable. The Nexari ambassador was horrified by the timeline. His people needed help immediately, not in 3 years, but Dr. So-Young explained that rushing the scientific research led to mistakes, and mistakes in biological research could have catastrophic consequences. The study would be done properly or not. At Aelin, the council chambers, Ambassador Taemin continued to take notes and provide helpful information, but his reports had become incredibly detailed documents that required careful study. When the Corvan delegate demanded an explanation for delayed military supplies, Taemin provided a 40-page analysis of supply chain management that somehow managed to explain everything while solving nothing. The report discussed optimal routing algorithms, resource allocation protocols, quality control procedures, and regulatory compliance requirements. It was completely accurate, thoroughly researched, and absolutely useless for actually getting the supplies. Delivered faster alien leaders began to realize that something fundamental had changed. The humans were still working hard, still following orders, still completing their assignments. But everything was taking much longer than it used to, and nobody could explain with the Zentari. Delegate called for an investigation into human work practices. He suspected sabotage or some kind of coordinated slowdown, but when investigators examined human work sites, they found nothing wrong. Every procedure was being followed exactly as specified. Every safety protocol was being observed. Every regulation was being met. The problem was not that humans were doing anything wrong. The problem was that they were doing everything exactly right for the first time in 3 centuries. Humans were working exactly as their contracts specified, with no extra effort, no creative shortcuts, no willingness to exceed expectations. The galaxy had been built on the assumption that humans would always find a way to make things work faster and better than officially required. When humans stopped going above and beyond their duties, the entire system began to slow down like a river clogged with debris. Captain Han Wu continued making his delivery runs, but his navigation computer seemed to have developed a mind of its own. It would identify hazards that required careful navigation around empty space. It would plot courses that followed the safest possible routes, even if they took twice as long. It would demand maintenance checks at the most inconvenient times. The luxury goods still arrived at their destinations, but weeks later than expected. Han Wu would apologize sincerely and explain that safety regulations required him to follow all recommended procedures. He had documentation to prove that every delay was caused by legitimate safety concerns. Communication Officer Minho began following communication protocols with military precision. Every message had to be verified through multiple channels. Every transmission required security clearance. Every report needed to be formatted according to 17 different standards. The process that used to take minutes now took hours, but everything was completely by the book. The beautiful thing about the human approach was that nobody could complain about it. They were not breaking rules or refusing orders. They were simply doing exactly what their contracts required, nothing more and nothing less. If alien supervisors wanted faster results, they would need to negotiate new contracts with different terms, but the aliens were beginning to realize that they had no idea how to do the work themselves. The Vorthans were excellent traders, but they could not fix a broken computer. The Zentari could find valuable minerals, but they could not maintain the equipment that extracted them. The Corvan military was fierce in battle, but helpless when their weapons needed repair. For centuries, these species had focused on the big picture, politics and strategy and grand plans, while leaving the actual work to humans. Now they were discovering that all their grand plans were worthless without people who knew how to make things actually work. The realization was slow and painful, but inevitable. The galaxy had been running on human competence and dedication for so long that nobody remembered how to function without it, and now that competence was being applied exactly as specified by the rules. No creativity, no extra effort, no willingness to solve problems that were not officially their responsibility. The aliens were finally getting exactly what they had always claimed to want: proper procedures followed to the letter, regulations observed with perfect precision, safety protocols implemented without exception. But they were discovering that getting exactly what you ask for is not always what you really need. The machine of galactic civilization was grinding to a halt, and the people who knew how to fix it were busy following the proper procedures for diagnosing the problem. The emergency council session was called on a Friday afternoon when half the galaxy was experiencing what the Zentari delegate had termed the efficiency crisis. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the great chamber, their voices raised in anger and frustration as they described the chaos spreading through their territories. The Corvan military representative stood first, his scarred armor gleaming under the chamber lights. He spoke of weapon systems that took months to repair, supply ships that arrived weeks late, and maintenance procedures that seemed designed to cause maximum delay. His latest offensive against the Nexari had stalled completely because ammunition shipments were consistently behind schedule. The Zentari mining delegate followed with equally dire reports. Their asteroid processing stations were operating at 30% capacity because human Technicians insisted on following elaborate safety protocols that had never been required before. Equipment that used to be repaired in hours now took days to fix and nobody could explain. With the Vorthen Trade Authority, representative was particularly vocal about the collapse of their cargo processing networks they had been forced to halt. Trade with 17 different worlds because their computer systems were being rebuilt according to specifications that seemed to change every day. The humans claimed they were following proper procedures, but the procedures had never taken this. Long before one by one, the alien leaders stood to complain about delayed projects, failed systems, and unresponsive human workers. The Nexari spoke of research projects that had been postponed indefinitely while scientists conducted studies that seemed to serve no purpose except to waste time. The Corvin military described battles that had been lost because reinforcements arrived too late. Through it all, Ambassador Temin sat quietly in the human section taking careful notes and listening to every complaint with apparent concern. When the shouting died down and the chamber fell silent, he stood slowly and consulted his data. Honored council members, he began, his voice calm and professional. I have reviewed the concerns raised today, and I believe I can offer some insight into the current situation. The chamber fell silent. Everyone leaned forward, eager to hear how their reliable servants would explain the crisis that was paralyzing galactic civilization. The humans had always been the ones who solved problems, not the ones who caused them. After extensive analysis, Temin continued, I have determined that human workers are performing exactly as specified in their employment contracts. All work is being completed to the highest standards with full attention to safety protocols and quality assurance procedures. If there are concerns about the pace of work, I would be happy to review the specific contractual obligations. The Vorthen delegate interrupted angrily. We do not need contract reviews. We need the systems fixed. Your people used to solve problems in hours, not months. What has changed? Min nodded politely. Indeed, human workers have historically exceeded their contractual obligations as a gesture of goodwill. However, recent events have highlighted the importance of following proper procedures. The tragic loss of the colony ship New Hope, for example, demonstrated the consequences of prioritizing speed over protocol. The mention of the New Hope disaster sent a ripple of discomfort through the chamber. The aliens had hoped that incident would be forgotten, but Temin had brought it back to remind everyone of what had happened when proper procedures were ignored. The Zentari delegate stood up, shouting about sabotage and deliberate delays. The Corvin military representative demanded immediate action to restore normal service levels. The Nexari ambassador accused humans of violating their contracts by working so slowly. Temin waited for the noise to die down before speaking again. If the Council wishes to modify the terms of human participation in galactic affairs, I am authorized to begin negotiations. However, I should mention that Earth has been reconsidering its position. In the galaxy, there are many opportunities for human development that do not require our participation in Council activities. The threat was subtle, but everyone in the chamber understood it. For the first time in 3 centuries, humans were suggesting that they might have better things to do than serve the galaxy. The species that had built the infrastructure of galactic civilization was hinting that they might prefer to work on their own projects. The Vorthen trade minister tried to salvage the situation by offering increased compensation for human workers, but Temin politely explained that the issue was not about money. Human workers were simply following the safety and quality standards that had been established by the Council itself. The Corvin general demanded to know why humans were suddenly unable to work as efficiently as they had for centuries. Temin consulted his notes and explained that efficiency had never been explicitly required by human contracts. The workers had always exceeded their obligations voluntarily, but recent events had made them more cautious about taking unnecessary risks. Dr. So Young Research Facility had conducted a comprehensive study of human work practices over the past 3 centuries. The results showed that human workers had been providing services far beyond their contractual requirements, often at significant personal cost. The New Hope disaster had highlighted the dangers of this approach. The Nexari ambassador asked what it would take to restore previous service levels. Temin smiled politely and explained that Earth was conducting a comprehensive review of all human activities in galactic space. The review would determine whether continued participation in Council affairs was in humanity's best interests. The chamber erupted in panic as the implications became clear. The aliens had spent centuries taking human service for granted, assuming that humans would always be available to solve their problems. Now they were facing the possibility that their most essential workers might simply leave over. The following days, alien leaders scrambled to understand what had gone wrong. They reviewed employment contracts, analyzed work patterns, and consulted with efficiency experts from dozens of species. The answer they found was both simple and terrifying. Humans had stopped caring about alien problems. They still did their jobs, but they no longer cared whether those jobs were done well, or quickly, or creatively. They followed the rules exactly as written, without any concern for whether the results met alien expectations. The galaxy's most dedicated servants had learned that their dedication was worthless. The species that had built the infrastructure of galactic civilization had discovered that they were building it for people who saw them as disposable tools. The workers who had made impossible things happen had realized that their efforts were not appreciated. For the first time in 3 centuries, humans were asking themselves a dangerous question: what would happen if they simply stopped working for people who did not value their lives? The answer was becoming clear every day as systems failed, projects stalled, and the great machine of galactic civilization ground slowly to a halt. The aliens had built their entire way of life on human competence and dedication. Now they were discovering what the galaxy looked like without it. The awakening had begun, and there was no going back. The humans had learned their own worth, and they were no longer willing to work for people who treated them as expendable. The galaxy that had taken them for granted was about to learn the true cost of their arrogance. Captain Hyunwoo continued his delivery runs, but his heart was no longer in the work. Engineer Yoonji still repaired broken systems, but she no longer took pride in exceeding expectations. Dia So-young still conducted research, but she no longer stayed late to help alien colleagues with their projects. The humans were still present, still working, still following orders, but the spark that had made them special was gone. They had learned that their service was not valued, and they had decided to provide exactly as much value as they received. The galaxy was about to discover that some servants are irreplaceable, but only after those servants had decided to stop serving. The final break came on a Monday morning when Ambassador Taemin stood before the council one last time. His voice was calm and professional as he delivered the message that would change the galaxy forever. The great chamber fell silent as representatives from hundreds of species listened to words they had never expected to hear. After careful consideration, the human coalition has decided to withdraw from active participation in galactic affairs. All human personnel will be returning to Earth or human-controlled space within the next 6 months. We thank the Council for the opportunity to serve and wish you well in your future endeavors. The reaction was immediate and predictable. The Vorthan Trade Minister leaped to his feet, demanding to know who would maintain their cargo processing networks. The Zentari mining delegates shouted about asteroid extraction facilities that only humans knew how to operate. The Corvan general wanted assurance that weapon systems would continue to function. The Nexari ambassador chimed in with concerns about research projects that were only half completed. Who would finish the medical studies that their people desperately needed? Who would maintain the crystal gardens that fed their colonies? Who would teach their children about mathematics and science? Taemin listened to each demand with the same polite attention he had shown for decades. His expression never changed as alien leaders who had ignored human needs for centuries suddenly realized how much they depended on human workers. When the shouting finally died down, he spoke again. I am sure the Council will find suitable replacements for human workers. There are many skilled species in the galaxy. Perhaps the Vorthans can train their own engineers to maintain cargo systems. The Zentari might develop their own mining expertise. The Corvan military could learn to repair their own weapons, but everyone in the chamber knew the truth. The Vorthans were brilliant traders, but they had never bothered to learn how their own systems worked. The Zentari could find valuable minerals anywhere in the galaxy, but they had no idea how to extract them without human-built machinery. The Corvan military was fearsome in battle, but completely helpless when their equipment needed maintenance. The Nexari could manipulate matter at the molecular level, but they were baffled by simple computer networks. The crystalline beings had built beautiful cities that grew like living things, but they needed human engineers to install the power systems that made those cities habitable for 3 centuries. Humans had been the galaxy mechanics, doctors, engineers, and problem solvers. They had built a civilization that worked so well that everyone else had forgotten how to make it work, and now they were leaving, taking their knowledge and skills with them. The evacuation began immediately. Captain Haiyan Wu loaded his cargo ship with human families heading home to Earth or the outer colonies. His final delivery was not luxury goods or weapons, but people who had spent their lives serving aliens who never appreciated their sacrifice. Engineer Yunji packed her tools and personal belongings, leaving behind repair manuals that no one else could understand. She had trained alien apprentices over the years, but none of them had bothered to learn more than the basics. They had always assumed that humans would be there to handle the difficult problems. Dara So Young transferred her research files to human databases, knowing that alien scientists would spend decades trying to reproduce work that her team had accomplished in months. Her laboratory had developed cures for dozens of diseases, but the aliens who benefited from those cures had never bothered to learn how the research was conducted. The galaxy began to fall apart almost immediately. Trade routes that had operated flawlessly for centuries ground to a halt when navigation computers failed and no one knew how to fix them. Cargo ships drifted helplessly in space while their alien crews waited for rescue that never came. Medical facilities closed when equipment broke down and replacement parts could not be installed properly. Alien doctors who had relied on human-designed diagnostic systems found themselves unable to treat patients with anything more complex than broken bones. Military vessels limped back to port with weapons that would not fire and engines that barely functioned. The Corvan fleet discovered that their most advanced battleships were worthless without the human technicians who knew how to maintain them. The Zentari mining operations collapsed when automated systems failed, and no one understood the programming that controlled them. Asteroid processing stations worth billions of credits became floating scrap metal because the aliens who owned them had never learned how they actually worked. The Vorthan Trade Network experienced total system failure when their central processing computers crashed permanently. The backup systems were equally useless because they had been designed by human engineers who had not bothered to create instruction manuals that aliens could understand. The Council sent desperate messages to Earth offering better contracts, higher pay, and political representation, but the humans had moved beyond such negotiations. They had learned that their true value lay not in serving others, but in serving themselves. The first messages offered double pay for human workers who would return to their old jobs. The second round of messages offered triple pay plus guaranteed representation on the High Council. The third set of messages offered complete autonomy for human workers plus ownership stakes in the systems they maintained, but none of the offers were accepted. The humans had discovered something more valuable than money or political power. They had found their own dignity and self-respect. They had learned that they could build something beautiful for themselves instead of maintaining systems that benefited people who saw them as disposable. On Earth, the returning humans found a world that had grown and prospered during their absence. The planet had become a center of learning and innovation, where human engineers and scientists worked on projects that would benefit humanity first. Cities reached toward the sky, powered by clean energy and connected by transportation networks that impressed even the humans who built them. The colonies that had been established by human settlers thrived without alien interference. They developed new technologies, created works of art, and built societies based on cooperation rather than exploitation. The humans who had maintained galactic civilization turned their skills toward building something that belonged to them alone. Years passed, and the galaxy continued to struggle with the aftermath of humanity departure. Systems failed regularly, and repairs took months instead of hours. The great works of galactic civilization crumbled slowly, maintained by aliens who had never bothered to learn how they functioned. The Council still met in their marble chambers, but the meetings were different now. The lights flickered constantly because the electrical systems were failing. The air recyclers made strange noises that no one knew how to fix. The communication systems worked intermittently when they worked at All the aliens still debated trade agreements and military campaigns, but their debates were increasingly pointless. Their ships could not carry cargo reliably. Their weapons did not function properly. Their colonies could not maintain basic life support systems. Some species tried to rebuild their infrastructure using their own workers, but the results were disappointing. The Vorthans managed to create a new cargo processing system, but it was slow, unreliable, and crashed regularly. The Zentari developed mining equipment that worked about half the time the Corvan military built weapons that were more dangerous to their own soldiers than to their enemies. Occasionally, alien ships would visit human space seeking trade agreements or technical assistance. They found a civilization that had learned to thrive without the galaxy approval. The humans were polite but distant, willing to trade but not to serve. The visitors saw cities that gleamed like jewels in the darkness, space stations that hummed with quiet efficiency, and ships that moved through space with graceful precision. Everything worked perfectly because it had been built by people who understood that good work required both skill and pride. The humans had walked away quietly, and in doing so they had found something more valuable than the council respect they had found their own worth. They had learned that they could build a civilization that served their own needs first and still have enough left over to help others who treated them as equals. Galaxy still struggled with the consequences of its arrogance. The council still met to